So I begin with the notion of a crisis. And of course, every book is trying to sell the idea that there's a crisis. And this is particularly a crisis that, again, Cato followers are aware of and indeed have emphasized in your own lives. I have a lot of data on the decline in public confidence in the federal government. I will only mention a few points of special interest. Even among Democrats, there has been a rapid and precipitous decline in confidence. 41% had favorable views of the federal government in 2013. That's 41% of Democrats. That's down 10% in 1 year. And this was before Obamacare was launched. According to the Brookings Institution, 56% of Democrats believe that the federal government is mostly or completely broken. Democrats. I mentioned that these statistics were gathered before the Obamacare fiasco in its rollout. Tom Edsall, in an op-ed in the Times yesterday, suggests that the consequences of that rollout are far greater than is anticipated by most political observers. He thinks it's going to ramify throughout the next several elections. What is the biggest threat to America's future, according to the public? 64% say it's big government, while only 26% said big business. And this polling was conducted only a few years after the recession. So that's it seems to me a very telling point of departure. In 2011, 79% of those polled were frustrated or angry with the federal government. 74% said the same thing in 2007, before the recession. Now, what are the reasons for this decline in public confidence in the government? I propose several explanations, but the one that I'm going to concentrate on, and the one that constitutes the bulk of my analysis, is sort of a straightforward one. The government performs very, very poorly. When I say the government, by the way, I'm referring to the federal government, not other governments, and I'm referring to domestic policy, not national security, military, or foreign affairs policy. My book is limited in those respects. So that's my subject, why government fails. There are a variety of theories as to why the government performs so poorly. An emphasis that will not surprise those of you who live in Washington is the explanation of partisan bickering and congressional paralysis. The Democrats blame the Republicans blame the Democrats for any failures that they're prepared to concede. I emphatically disagree with this. If you examine our history of political discourse, it has been tendentious, uncivil, angry, and furiously partisan from the very, very beginning. Some of the greatest achievements of the past, the Intercontinental Railroad and Hoover Dam and interstate highway system, were accomplished only fitfully and after a protracted disagreement by policymakers. Polarization, I argue, is not the cause of our problems, it's the consequence of our problems. And there's a remarkable correlation that I think confirms this point of view. First is that the growth in government spending and policy ambitions has paralleled almost perfectly, if you chart them, the growth in public disaffection and contempt for government. Per capita spending by the federal government today is greater than in France, Germany, and the UK. This growth occurs in good times and bad. It's unlinked. It's been set adrift from the Keynesian cyclical uses of government. And it doesn't depend on whether Republicans or Democrats control what goes on in Washington. The debt to GDP ratio of the federal government exceeds that in most EU countries. And it also exceeds the Latin American average, just to provide some context. This growth of the federal government is obscured by a number of factors, except to those who study these matters very carefully. One is the immense growth in private contracting by the government, the immense participation in the implementation of government programs by nonprofits and state and local governments. And the myth that the United States has a small public sector and is a welfare state laggard, although perhaps true in some comparative terms, is, as a myth, utterly false. One way of understanding what's happened is summarized by, and I summarize in the book, by James Q. Wilson, the late James Q. Wilson, and John Duilio, who distinguished between the old system and the new system. The old system, they write, had a small agenda. When someone proposed adding a new issue to the public agenda, a major debate often arose over whether it was legitimate for the federal government to take action at all in the matter. For the government to take bold action under this system, the nation usually had to be facing a crisis. Each succeeding crisis left the government bureaucracy somewhat larger than it had been before, but when the crisis ended, the exercise of extraordinary powers ended. The new system is characterized by a large policy agenda, the end of the debate over the legitimacy of government action, except in the area of First Amendment freedoms, the diffusion and decentralization of power in Congress, and the multiplication of interest groups. Under the old system, the checks and balances made it difficult for the government to start a new program, and so the government remained relatively small. Under the new system, these checks and balances make it hard to change what the government is already doing, and so the government remains large.